Hello, everyone. I'm here with D. James Bailey, Director of Workforce Composition and Planning, here for another NextSource podcast to discuss the ongoing evolution of contingent workforce solutions today. James, thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Great to be here today, Daniel. Thank you.
So today we're going to be touching on the past historical milestones, the current environment, and what we think the next big step will be in this industry. Given your experience, where has the industry come from and where do we think it'll go?
Well, that's a big question, Daniel. And I think there's a lot of history to get through and that we need to talk about the current environment as well before I can really share my take on the future. I'd say there's been a lot of impactful evolution in the space over the past several years. You can go all the way back to the launch of the modern managed service provider program to centralized service and launching the vendor management systems to create efficiency and transparency as well as data management. We saw a majority of programs take on a supplier-funded approach, and that's generally still around today. Recently, we've started to see the introduction of artificial intelligence and various other software as a solution tech stacks being included into the overall ecosystem for managing contingent workers. There's a lot of bolt-on accessories coming out that you can include in your VMS now. And from a service line offering, we're also starting to see the rise of managed direct sourcing and new creative approaches to engaging talent.
And of course, there's also COVID.
Correct. Looking to the present, we have a lot of disruption and change, which is perceived as a direct result of COVID. But what's emerging are things that are not necessarily born out of COVID.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think there's a lot of people that would argue the point of COVID isn't affecting major drivers in the workforce today.
That's a good challenge. So look at it this way, Daniel. COVID is just a catalyst. It's exacerbating a number of underlying issues that were already there. It's accelerating the impact of several major underlying issues that were always going to rise to the top. This just sped that up. So for example, we're always going to start experiencing worker shortages based on the fact that the number of individuals leaving the workforce for retirement is in excess of the number of people from younger generations that are joining the workforce. All that's happened is the timetable for that is simply sped up. The impact is more significantly felt now due to the pandemic and a number of other environmental factors, right? But this was always coming.
Quick little wrap up in the historical overview, James, and good insights on the impact felt by the pandemic. Given the history and context for the current environment, how will organizations be successful and how does that work go into the future of evolution in our industry?
Well, the first thing to say is that these can be really trying times for organizations' leadership, especially in the people and procurement functions. But we all know that disruption can be a positive word, a transformational word. And while these times can be challenging to navigate, these times can also be a catalyst for positive change. Adjusting to a more flexible approach may no longer just be for organizations trying to get ahead or who are trying to differentiate themselves from competitors. This could now be a requirement for continuing to be successful or to simply maintain a status quo in this new environment, right? Those who wait, they just won't be viewed as laggards on an old school adoption scale chart, right? They may find that their organizations are not able to be successful. And the thing is, proactive companies leveraging data to create an understanding of the ongoing implications will be able to plan and execute and set themselves apart. Look at it this way. Being flexible is a key way to expand your workforce. The good news is, you could not find a better time to implement these changes, nor could you find a better partner than NextSource. You can outsource a number of these challenges, but outsourcing is only successful when you forge an equal partnership between human resources, procurement, and your MSP provider. So now that we've looked at what's come before and what is happening now, and we've stated that there's a clear need for flexibility and change, I believe the next big evolution will be behavioral. It will be a change in thought and approach to workforce management. And it will be one that starts to include the contingent worker roles into the workforce planning process.
Okay, James, that kind of sounds like total talent management. Hasn't that been around for a while?
Well, that's an interesting response. And I would argue that it hasn't. It's been discussed for years, but it's not yet something tangible that you can really touch. To me, it's more of a concept or potentially a methodology that hasn't been very clearly defined. So why hasn't it caught on? It all goes back to our three core components of any major program or implementation or project, and that's people, process, and technology. If we look at this from a technology perspective, there has not been a single platform to truly combine and manage the workforce as one. And the various integrations and configurations common within our industry just don't cut it. Looking to the future, I do believe that Vindley and Workday are planning to solve this problem. If we go to a people perspective, there can be a lack of knowledge or bandwidth where companies don't have enough internal expertise to understand and manage the full scope of contingent workers. And sometimes internal HR and procurement teams don't develop a true partnership with their MSP providers. And that's needed to develop the culture to prioritize managing a combined workforce. Now, if we talk about developing the culture to do this, if you don't have it, then the process itself may not value the importance of the contingent workers. Establishing them as temps that are a discretionary step in the planning process, and more commonly reflected as simple journal entries. Look at it another way. Contingent labor is a strategic resource for many organizations, but culturally, some organizations still treat it like a commodity, and it creates a disconnect. But bringing the roles that contingent workers fill into workforce planning is a physical exercise. You can see it, you can touch it, and it can add immediate value. And it can start to change how organizations view and discuss contingent labor as a resource.
Okay, well, if it adds so much value, why do you think it's not done more extensively across organizations? Like, what are the benefits and even drawbacks that may stop people from considering to do it, and how to do it? Or how do you do it?
Right. Well, in regards to why people aren't doing it, simply put, getting started can be extremely daunting. Kicking off any major task can be. It's tough to find a starting point, right? But the most important thing to emphasize is that planning for these activities can be incremental. You simply start where you are and move forward. In organizations that consistently use contingent labor, it's not uncommon to find small teams primarily staffed with contingent workers or long-term contingent workers that could be engaged in the capacity for several years without being converted or replaced. These situations are prime examples of roles that can be brought into the longer-term workforce planning exercise. You know, organizations that tend to have large groups of contractors or who keep contractors for long periods of time because they have trouble getting headcount and contingent workers in some organizations a workaround. You know, in some cases, you can even see a shadow workforce arising within an organization. When this happens, and when you don't get to look at the combined workforce and have a good handle on your contingent workforce, you actually won't know the total cost for people working in your company, right? You won't know what it costs to employ people. And this also starts to hide your risk exposure if you don't have full visibility. If there are legitimate long-term needs, right, that aren't being covered by FTEs, this can actually help you start to look at the cost benefit of keeping some roles contingent, especially when you consider the evolving tenure guidelines and increased co-employment penalties the longer workers are kept in if an incident arises. And some organizations do this because they feel it's more costly to hire someone as an FTE, right? So if your organization does feel it's more costly to hire someone as an FTE, then you need to start considering how long it takes to train people to come in and recognize that for these longer term needs that you're putting contingent workers into, that you might have to do that over and over again. And put a price point on that time, right? Is that consistent churn and training more costly than the overhead of one of your FTEs that you're trying to avoid paying by hiring contingent workers? This might give you a way to think about it, right? Because if that's the situation, there may be a case to have roles that were historically viewed as long-term FTEs or contingent roles to make them FTEs, or to look at a true outsourcing scenario. Either way, putting these roles in your workforce planning process is a great way to start the conversation and build alignment throughout your organization. NextSource can help create an environment where this can happen. And we can make sure leadership understands the challenges and costs. And what are those challenges, and what are the costs of changing? And what are the costs of not changing and remaining inflexible?
Okay, well, thank you so much, James. I think that's about all the time we have today. I definitely think we'll be speaking in soon on this topic and kind of more insights. For everyone listening, make sure you head over to our social sites. They can be found at www.nextsource.com, and make sure to follow our blogs and our postings, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, James.
Thank you, Daniel.